the executive producer of Black Journal, Tony Brown.
Why are Black Americans as a group considered enemies of America? On this edition of Black Journal from the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., home of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Secret Service, and the Nixon administration, Black Journal, with the help of Jack Anderson, syndicated columnist, and Dick Gregory, will investigate We, the Enemy.
Black Journal is an on-the-air magazine reporting on the personalities, ideas, and issues that affect Black America. It attempts to achieve balance by reporting from a Black perspective.
On May 16, 1972, 1 year before the Watergate enemies list was made public by John Dean, Jack Anderson exposed in his syndicated column the existence of a computerized list compiled by the Secret Service of 5,500 Black Americans, which it labeled the Black Nationalist File. Everyone in this file is of, quote, protective interest to the Secret Service. What this means is that, in the opinion of the Secret Service, they either bear ill will toward the president, another government official, have demonstrated at the White House, have a criminal record, or a record of mental instability. Access to a series of documents about the counterintelligence operations of J. Edgar Hoover's FBI was gained because Carl Stern, a reporter at NBC, sued the Justice Department under the Freedom of Information Act. The Washington Post, in an editorial of March 15, 1974, said, quote, Mr. Kelly might take a look at the Bureau's methods of seeking information from Black communities as disclosed in those papers and in comments by former agents. Bookstores, churches, saloons, storefront community organizations, campus and student organizations all seemed to be fair game for the FBI if they had the words Afro or Black in their titles. In fact, one former agent who had been assigned to racial matters here in the district told a Post reporter, the Bureau was interested in anything or anyone that said Black. On Tuesday, June 27, 1972, in Washington, D.C., the Congressional Black Caucus held an ad hoc hearing on governmental lawlessness. Jack Anderson, syndicated columnist and winner of the 1972 Pulitzer Prize for National Reporting, was a witness. During his testimony, Mr. Anderson brought out some very vital and enlightening facts about intelligence activities aimed at American citizens, particularly Blacks. Mr. Anderson's testimony was as follows.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Black Caucus, I consider it an honor to be asked to testify here today. I only hope that the testimony can, in some small way, help this nation's Black citizens gain the rights and privileges so long denied them. The subject I shall address myself to is government surveillance of private citizens. Living in this country in this modern age is like living in a fishbowl. Our civil liberties and rights of privacy have slowly given way over the years to an increasingly intrusive and authoritarian government, which has trampled upon our precious freedoms in the name of defending them. We have known for years, of course, that the FBI freely spies on citizens. We have hoped that it was being done with prudence and with a view toward protecting the nation against violent overthrow or toward preventing criminal acts and apprehending those who break the law. We have suspected this was not the case. I have now documented our worst fears. I'm willing, furthermore, to make some of the documents available to the committee if the members so desire. Most of these people are in the FBI's files because they have exercised their constitutional right of dissent or have had the courage and wherewithal to offer financial support for causes they believe in. For this, they are called radicals and subversives and subjected to searching investigation. This is bad enough in a political system that is supposed to tolerate freedom of expression. When it comes to Blacks, however, this situation is even more grievous.
A grievous situation for Blacks indeed. According to Anderson's testimony, anyone with dark skin who dares to open his mouth is considered by the FBI a Black, quote, subversive. Anderson goes on to say that he has seen dozens of cases on Black leaders whose only crime is voicing the woes and tribulations of their people, who have done nothing more than organize their ranks, who are guilty only of peacefully petitioning their government in redress of grievances. as their Constitution says they have an inalienable right to do. Mr. Anderson continued.
The most noticeable characteristic of the files is that the slightest deviation from the status quo, or what the FBI defines as the status quo, is enough to trigger an investigation of a black American. Back in the late 60s, for example, anyone who yelled black power was a flaming radical in the FBI's eyes. Indeed, any philosophy or program that would mean independence for blacks is apparently grounds for suspicion. The black movement is painted a flaming red. All associations of any blacks with persons left of Richard Nixon are carefully noted and stored away.
Anderson cited examples from the files to document his charges. He was careful, however, to select innocuous quotes that would not spread the overabundance of half-truths and misinformation that is contained in the FBI files. The FBI currently has files on many prominent Americans that it considers subversive. Included in this file are such black leaders as the late Dr. Martin Luther King, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, Reverend Ralph David Abernathy, Floyd McKissick Jr., Roy Wilkins, Bayard Rustin, Roy Ennis, the Reverend Jesse Jackson. The list of black, quote, subversives goes on and on. It includes Stokely Carmichael and Eldridge Cleaver. But the FBI surveillance does not stop with black leaders. Also spied on are such entertainers as Harry Belafonte and Eartha Kitt, writers such as James Baldwin and Ossie Davis, athletes such as Muhammad Ali and Joe Louis. Black organizations also command their share of file space in the FBI building. Some of the groups under surveillance include the Black Panthers, the Student National Coordinating Committee, the Nation of Islam, the Republic of New Africa, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the Congress of Racial Equality, and the NAACP. At the Secret Service, another governmental surveillance agency, files are also kept on prominent Americans, including a number of black leaders. The agency's justification for keeping these records is that they have, quote, protective function. Everyone in their files, therefore, is of, quote, protective interest. The Secret Service has put the names of all their surveillance subjects in a computer bank. There are some 180,000 names in this data bank, including aliases. At the push of a button, therefore, the names of these alleged potential assassins comes rolling out. Some of them, about 300, are considered dangerous. All others, by far the majority, are thought to be, quote, not dangerous. Many of the so-called assassination-prone are blacks. The Secret Service keeps most of its black suspects in a separate category called the Black Nationalist File. There are some 5,500 names in this computerized file. They are by file number, and all of them can be retrieved at the flick of a switch in a matter of minutes. Not only is it a crisis when black people suffer from a class action that defines them as automatic enemies in their own land, but the question of personal freedom as a citizen is clearly at stake.
It may be justly asked, where does the government get the authority to conduct investigations of this sort?
From Washington, D.C., Black Journal presents We the Enemy. When Black Journal originates in various cities, viewers in that area can participate by calling in. This edition from Washington, D.C. features Jack Anderson, syndicated columnist, and Dick Gregory, political satirist. And now, our host and moderator, Tony Brown.
I think it's very important to place a lot of those statistics, particularly those that you brought out, Mr. Anderson, in historical perspective. That information, or the FBI surveillance, and correct me if I'm incorrect, began in 1961 when John F. Kennedy, a Democrat, was president. It continued under Lyndon Johnson and into the Nixon administration, and recently in 1971, according to the FBI director, the new FBI director, Clarence Kelly, he no longer is using, quote, lawlessness to fight lawlessness. Is that accurate?
Yes, I think it's accurate. I would make this clarification. This was done by the late FBI Chief J. Edgar Hoover. There was no evidence at any time that it was ordered by John Kennedy or Lyndon Johnson. There's not even a great deal of evidence that they were aware of the scope of it. They certainly were aware that black leaders were in the FBI files, but I don't think that they were at any time aware of the scope of it. The late J. Edgar Hoover had a fixation about blacks, and these files, I think, reflect that fixation, reflect his own personal attitudes, much more so than official policy.
Dick, you were on the famous or infamous Watergate or the White House enemies list. What is your personal reaction to having been placed on that list?
Well, when the press got in touch with me, I think it was Bob Johnson at Jet Magazine called me when the news broke and told me I was on Nixon's enemy list. Did I have any comment? And I told him, yeah, call him up and tell him I accept before he changed his mind. I think it goes deeper than the FBI. Now, Mr. Kelly, since he's been head of the FBI, have said time and time again that this is not the policy anymore. Let me show you a letter that I received on September the 26th. It was mailed long after this policy had stopped. Now, I've lived in Chicago for 20 years, and many people could write me a letter, Dick Gregory, the White House, and they would forward that mail to Chicago, and I would get it. I moved from Chicago on August the 20th. Now, I can understand if you sent a letter to Chicago, they would forward it to my new address. Here's a lady in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, on the 26th of September, 73, said to Dick Gregory, I don't know his address. To the colored man that appears on talk shows on television who's lost a great amount of weight on a fruit diet and discipline. Now,
that's on the cover of the envelope.
It's on the cover of the envelope,
Yeah,
right. Now,
yeah.
she drops this in the mailbox, right? When it gets downtown at the post office in Philadelphia, they put on it Post Office Box 266, Long Pond Road, Plymouth, Massachusetts, 02360. It have not stopped, man. You know, nobody in Philadelphia should know my number, and if I got a letter in Philadelphia, it should have been forwarded to Chicago, and from Chicago to here. You know, it also go deeper than the FBI, because I have had Air Force intelligence sitting in the audience. I've had kin people of them. A lady came into the nightclub when I was working at Mr. Kelly's in Chicago, and she said, you know, my brother really loves you. He's with Air Force intelligence, and his job was to go out and run surveillance on one of your speeches. And he listened to your speech, and he just fell in love with you. Now, if we talk about the FBI, then where are these other groups getting the authority from to do this? And so, you know, I had a very interesting thing happen in Chicago. I knew my phone was being tapped. So I refused to pay my phone bill. My phone bill went up to about $3,000 or $4,000, right? And they refused to cut my phone off. So I held a press conference in Chicago and questioned why I can make, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and the phone company won't cut my phone off, but poor folks get a $14 bill and theirs get cut off, right? And I demand that they cut my phone off. Well, by the time I got home, they'd cut it off just one way, you know. Nobody could call in. I mean, I couldn't call out, but everybody could call in. They explained that to me by saying, we know you make your livelihood and run your business by receiving calls on your phone, and that's why we decided to leave. And I demanded that they cut my phone off totally before I paid the bill. And so I would say, you know, there's some very interesting things that have happened with Watergate. You know, every time you hear people mention Dick Nixon, they talk about the Watergate cover-up. Now, when do we start talking about Watergate? I don't want to know about the body that's under the sheet, who covered it up. I want to know who the murderer is. Now, some very interesting things. While we was occupying ourselves with the Watergate hearings last summer, the most important hearings in this country happened in Senator Symington's committee, where they was interviewing and holding secret hearings about the CIA. Now, in that, it was admitted that the CIA had given instructions to police departments across this country, which is a complete violation of their charter. Senator Baker have information where the CIA have said to him that they have recorded conversations of presidents for the last 20 years without them knowing this. And I think it's just deeper. You see, I've said many times, had the Warren report been honest and legitimate, there wouldn't have been a Watergate today in no shape, form, or fashion. You know, it's so much that goes down. For instance, when Malcolm X was gunned down in New York City, there was an African by the name of, not an African, an Indian in Africa by the name of DePinto. He was the editor of the Pan-African magazine. He had met with Malcolm in London, England, and it was the two of them that were supposed to come to the UN and talk about the genocide treaty and racism. The day Malcolm was gunned down in New York City, DePinto was gunned down in Nairobi within a 24-hour period. Now, somewhere we have to start looking at connections and understand that this thing gets so big and so wild, and we also have to remember how Hitler came to power. Hitler created so much violence and blamed it on other groups that a whole nation went to the monster that was creating it and said, save us. Now, just for a few minutes, let me just run through some things that can be checked out. One, we had Martin Luther King was assassinated. Now, the FBI have admitted very quietly that when James Earl Ray escaped from the Missouri State Penitentiary, for the first time in the history of the FBI, they accidentally sent the wrong fingerprints out on a man. Now, let's go to Bobby Kennedy's assassination. Here is a very interesting document because this is from the Los Angeles County. This is the autopsy report on Bobby Kennedy. It shows here he was shot 3 times, and if you go through this, you will see that all the bullets entered him in the back. The one in the brain, the other 2 was in the back with Sirhan standing in front of him. Now, either we got to say that somebody is putting out wrong information, or we got to say that there is some group in this country that can do one of the most tremendous cover-up jobs. And I think it goes deeper than the FBI. When George Wallace was shot, Sirhan, they took the gun away from him. We all watched it on television. He didn't reload it. The gun that Arthur Bremer had was a 5-shot 38 caliber pistol. Now, when George Wallace was taken to the hospital and examined before he was operated on, he's been hit 5 times. Now, somebody got to ask, if Arthur Bremer got a gun that shoots only 5 times and Wallace been hit 5 times, who shot the other 3 people on that platform? The Alabama State Trooper, the Secret Service agent, and that woman. And we can't say this time that the bullets jumped out of Wallace and hit the Secret Service agent because Wallace was laying on the ground when the Secret Service agent grabbed his throat. Now, if you go back and look at the FBI testimony at the Arthur Bremer trial, they admitted in open court that the bullets that had been taken out of George Wallace would not have matched the bullets that came out of Arthur Bremer's gun. And so I think it goes deeper than the FBI. I think we got to bring the CIA into it. I think we got to bring the DIA into it and all of the other military intelligence, or we will see this country under some type of rule other than a supposedly free democratic society within the next 18 months. It's very vicious what's happening.
Mr. Anderson, you were on the White House enemies list. And 1, I'd like to solicit from you your reaction, personal reaction. And 2, I'd like to hear from you what your interpretation or what significance do you place on that White House enemies list or on the black nationalist file which you made public.
Well, I think if I had not been on the White House enemies list, like Dick Gregory, I would have sued.
Well, what is it that you do that in your mind makes you an enemy of the White House?
Well, this is, of course, what troubles me about the enemies list. It's their use of language. With Richard Nixon, what people who used to be political opponents, people who used to be adversaries, people who used to be critics, are suddenly enemies. Richard Nixon has always had that attitude toward those who criticize him. I think that it has come from his introversion. He looks within. He tends to brood, and he tends to hold grudges. People who have met him 30 years afterwards find that he still remembers some slight or some statement that they have made that's been hostile. And so he reacts by being hostile, and he divides the world between friends and enemies, and he uses this harsh language.
Do you believe that Richard Nixon made up the list, or you believe that people loyal to Richard Nixon?
No. Richard Nixon did not make up the list. But the people around him tend, as in the manner of young men, to magnify even the feelings and the attitudes of the man in the middle, of the man in the center, of the man at the pinnacle. I think that some of these young men, the H.R. Haldeman's, the John Ehrlichmans, and the John Deans, actually magnified and exaggerated the opinions and the views and the attitudes of Richard Nixon. Young men who are inexperienced and immature tend to do that. I sympathize very much with what Dick has said, and I don't think these conspiracies and these plots are as serious as Dick does, but I think that he has every right to be suspicious. When an FBI will keep files on a black because he's black, because he happens to be a black leader, and in that list of 5,500, and we gave a copy of the list to by name, to the Black Caucus. So this isn't something that can be denied.
Let me ask you a question. I'm not so sure that you will answer it. I feel obligated to ask you. How do you get lists such as this? How do you infiltrate these you seem to infiltrate the infiltrators, the agencies that are in intelligence operations?
Well, this is what we specialize in doing. We've always believed, you know, Dick. We've always believed, Tony, that the press in a free country represents the governed and not the governors. That the press in a free country is supposed to inform the people who own the country, and the people who own the country, the people who are the sovereigns, are not the Richard Nixons, not the Henry Kissingers, but the people of the country. And it's our job to inform them what's going on. And I always tell my reporters, look, let's go out and find out what's going on, not what they say is going on. Now, if you're going to do that, you have to develop sources on the inside. So I've never been interested in what the FBI says is happening, or what Ron Ziegler says is happening, or what Henry Kissinger says is happening. Because I find that presidential spokesmen and presidential appointees will never tell me anything that the president doesn't want me to know. Well, I want to know what the president doesn't want me to know.
Sure.
I want to know what the government doesn't want me to know. And of course I had FBI sources.
Sure.
And I got disturbed over the fact that they were keeping files on people who have never committed crimes and are not likely to commit crimes. And I was disturbed enough that I asked my sources to give me some of the files, and so that I could see for myself. And I would name people, see if there's a file on so-and-so, see if there's a file on so-and-so, and it's amazing how often there were. Some of the files actually begin, summaries of the files I've read that begin with the statement, this individual is not the subject of an FBI investigation. Well, you wonder what in the world they have an FBI file on him for.
Sure.
But in defense of the FBI, I think that I would have to agree that Clarence Kelly is changing the focus there. Everything that my sources, now mind you, these are the sources who have given me FBI files in the past. These are sources who have been willing to tell me what's going on. Now, if they would tell me that these things before, you know, I have to believe them now. And they say that Clarence Kelly is reforming, is changing. Well, does that mean that the files no longer exist? No, the files are still there.
Do you also feel that means that there is a subtle change perhaps in the attitude of black people? In other words, are you saying perhaps that the FBI is becoming more sensitive to the fact that black people just want the same thing that white people want?
Well, I think that most people knew that anyhow. I think that, as I say, I think that this was an aberration. But the FBI is stuck with these files. There's even a law in the books that says the FBI can't destroy its files. Once you get a file, it's a problem to get rid of it. And I don't think they've solved that problem. But it is my impression that Clarence Kelly has stopped investigating blacks because they're black, or blacks because they talk about black power, and that he has put the FBI on a far more sensible course.
But we have a call I think the both of you might be interested in. Let's see if we can get it. Hello? So, hello?
With this whole subject,
Hello?
does this tie in?
Well, they're not ready yet. Dick, there was a questioner, I suppose they hung up, that had a question about what possible mafia relationship, if any, would you suspect in these matters?
Well, I have said many times that I see it very difficult for a 9-year-old child in New York, Cleveland, Chicago to get heroin. And it's a known documented that we have 9-year-old kids that have died from heroin. But for a 9-year-old child to find a heroin man, but the FBI can't. Now the argument is the FBI don't deal in heroin. The FBI done dealt with me and I haven't violated no law. So if the FBI can deal with me on their own, if you can run surveys on black people just for saying black power without a law, then don't tell me you can't run surveys on these junkies and these dope pushers that follow the streets. So I have to say, and you see, I have a mental thing in my head that says one. Jack Anderson said, here's the way he gets his information. Well, out here, I know how you get your information. There's a lot of people out here that's inside that's willing to give information to anyone that has integrity. And so most of the tips you will get will come from little guys that's like been at a place for 20 years and know something is going on wrong and say, if I could just get to Jack, things will be all right. Now you're going to get more tips and leaks like that that will promote you to call up your big sources that hadn't told you that, because that might be insignificant to them because they might have not even known about it. And so consequently, I just cannot believe that the mafia can run rampant in this country, but I know what to do to break up the mafia. If I could get the mafia to run down the street and yell Black Power for about 15 minutes time, they would be busted in this country within 3 weeks' time.
Well, now we have a question. Now, let's see what he was saying. Hello?
Yes,
You're on Black
in
Journal.
connection with the mafia question with Dick Gregory, I was wondering, does Jack Anderson have any information that would lead us to believe that the government is controlled somewhat by the mafia politically and as well as economically in the United States?
Thank you.
Now, on the federal level, quite the opposite. All my information would indicate that the mafia has been afraid of the federal government. And the only mafia supported people who have come to Washington are those who develop their mafia connections at a local or state level. The mafia did infiltrate into the politics at the lower levels, particularly New Jersey, right, to some extent New York. In Louisiana we find some. In Illinois, in the Chicago area, we find some. And these mafia-supported politicians, in a few cases, have progressed and been promoted higher up and have come to Washington. But with the exception of those rare people, I find no real mafia influence in Washington itself.
All right, let's take another question. Hello, you're on Black Journal.
Yes, I have a two-part question for both guests. I'd like to know if they think whether or not the black people as a group will be made the scapegoat in the attempt to change the form of government, and two, what is the purpose and is there any connection in blaming the black Muslims for so many violent acts in the country?
Thank you. You understand that the first part was, do you suspect that blacks would be made the scapegoats of any potential form of coup d'etat or change in the government? And two, what significance do you attach to the alleged violent involvement in terms of the black Muslims?
Well, one, I think one, again we have to go back to that Nazi era and see how when groups get ready to move in and get that power hunger, they reach back and find the most vulnerable group they can find. Now we say that there was a school superintendent shot in Oakland, California, and the guy standing next to him that was shot said they were blacks. Now we got 2 white kids arrested. Now, did they have their face darkened up? I mean, what evidence do the police have? I mean, it's just, we haven't reached the groovy thing in this country where a black can be suspected and a white be arrested for it. And so I would say it is, if you can get groups to create acts of violence. The Charlie Manson trial was a very interesting trial because what was brought out in that they were supposed to kill rich white folks, blame it on black folks to get a racial conflict going in this country, right? Now, we had a white kid that hit the White House twice in a helicopter. Now, the way they explained this was that he flunked out of pilot school, but the state trooper that was chasing him said he never knew a helicopter could be maneuvered like that, right? The next day, the federal government dropped charges against him and put him in a mental hospital to be checked. That's not the way you do it. You go to the mental hospital to be checked first. If you found to be insane, then charges are dropped. Now, let's say if this kid would have hit the White House when someone was in it with a helicopter full of dynamite, right? Blew up the White House, been killed himself, and if you have all these clandestine things that say, we know he belonged to the Civil Liberation Group, right? Now you automatically have a thing that's going. And so I say it's very, very important that when you have J. Edgar Hoover that will say we got to watch Martin Luther King because he could become the biggest thing in the country if he quits all that old nonviolence and that old stuff that interests liberals. Now you have a man here that's saying that the more violent the thing becomes, the more strength that you're going to get. Now, the other thing as far as the church is concerned, we have a passionate hate for churches in America. not just black churches, the Mormons. Brigham Young was lynched in Chicago, man, because of his beliefs. Look what the Catholics went through in this church. Look what Psycho and Vanzetti went through because they were Italian Catholics. And so we have a passionate hatred for that whole religious structure for some way that they have always been used for scapegoats. Now that don't mean churches haven't been guilty of acts of violence or stealing or cheating, but if you look at the record of America, whenever a new church seems to emerge, you always have tremendous things that comes out that happens to it.
All right, we have a number of questions, and I'm going to try to get as many of them as possible, and we can make our answers as short. Would you want to care to answer that question also?
Well, I go along to some extent. I can understand why Dick Gregory would be concerned about this, because throughout the past 200 years, blacks have often been made scapegoats for things that they didn't do. I think that this is happening less now than it used to.
Okay.
But I think that it's still going on.
Still going on. All right. Hello?
Yes?
You're on Black Journal. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to know how both guests feel about affirmative action. There's a Supreme Court case on affirmative action right now, and does society owe the blacks a debt that they have to take a positive action to rectify?
Thank you. I think basically he's asking, do we need quotas for blacks, and do we feel that the society owes blacks anything, and do we feel that affirmative action quote programs are necessary?
Well, I'm opposed to that myself. I think that blacks should be individuals, and we should forget about the skin. And I just don't like to see quotas of any kind. But if blacks are being discriminated against, and the only way that they can get a fair shake, if quotas are the only way, I'd rather have that than have them be discriminated against. But it seems to me that we ought to have matured a little, and I think we're continuing to mature more. And I don't see why we should have to set up artificial quotas. I would tend to oppose that.
You know, my thinking on this is when JFK was president, a bill was pushed through the Senate and the Congress that said any black, not white, that would go to med school and after he graduated would give 5 years of his life to various countries in Africa, the United States government would pay his way. Now, we are a race of people with over 30 million people. We have less than 5,000 doctors, black, in America. Now, we really have a problem with doctors because although the police takes the rap, and rightfully so, for bigotry and shooting blacks in the back and minority folks, he's not the worst racist in this country. We got bigoted white ministers, bigoted white priests, bigoted white nuns, bigoted white doctors that wouldn't tolerate a black even coming into office, bigoted white lawyers. The cop is the only one who has the gun and the stick that do in my head. But there are some ministers, if their decision was that I believe in a heaven and hell, and that white bigoted minister decided if I was going, I wouldn't go because I'm black, that's far worse than a cop shooting me in the back with the warning shot. And so now I say this to say, everywhere we look in life, we see quotas for this, quotas for that, and quotas for this. And again, we go back. If this is the way to do it, I would suggest putting a quota on the quota. Let's say for 10 years, we're going to deal with this, and if we see it solving the problem, we will dissolve it.
Okay. Hello, you're on Black Journal. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to ask Mr. Anderson why the press didn't follow up on James McCord's testimony during the Watergate hearings about his job to get an office in the White House, I believe he said, working for the military investigating black organizations in the New York City area.
Thank you.
I didn't follow up because I didn't know about it.
Well, he said the press.
The press.
I didn't know that he was doing that, but I have been concerned about, of course, that plumber's operation, that para-police unit that was operating undercover without license, running around violating the law. I know a lot about them because I was apparently their principal target. They had a blackboard down there in their basement sanctorum with my name scrawled on it as sort of a voodoo to inspire them on to greater effort, you know. But Dick Gregory's made a good point about this Nazi mentality. Now, I don't think we've gone that far. I don't think people in the White House have gone that far, Dick. But I think freedom is a very fragile thing, and we've got to be careful. Now, you take this G. Gordon Liddy. He was
Who was that?
G. Gordon Liddy.
Uh-huh.
He was a member of that plumbers group. He was the chief plumber. He had a White House license to violate the law. Well, I went into him because he was investigating me, so I investigated him. And I found that, well, just one incident. Back on February 7th of 1971, he took a little group of anti-subversives like himself and arranged for a private showing of a Nazi propaganda film down at the National Archives. Checked it out with 3 witnesses who were there. There were other witnesses who wouldn't talk, but 3 of them, each one separately, not knowing we'd talk to the other 2, told us the same story. This film showed Adolf Hitler in a German plane coming out of a swirl of clouds and landing on German soil, and then Hitler stepped forth like a Teutonic god to save Germany. And while this thing was unreeling, our witnesses said, G. Gordon Liddy was watching in utter fascination. One witness said he was in a state of levitation. He wasn't even sitting on his chair. And all of them agreed that after this Nazi propaganda, pro-Adolf Hitler film ended, that he turned around, his eyes wide, his face flushed, and spoke to the group in German, a language he apparently knew. Now, what was a guy like that doing on the White House payroll? So these are legitimate fears.
Yeah.
I think, Dick, that your fears are exaggerated, but I don't blame you, because when things like this go on, when you have this para-police unit, when you have the FBI keeping files on 5,500 blacks, when you have this sort of thing, I don't blame a Dick Gregory for believing that there's a conspiracy under every bush.
You say you don't believe we've gone this far. The question is, at what point did they believe Hitler had gone that far? This is very important. The gentleman said, how did the press overlook this? I think they have a blatant record of one of the greatest stories that's ever broke in the history of this country, as far as I'm concerned, was last year that hundreds of millions of dollars of heroin had been shipped back from Vietnam, sold up in the bodies of dead American soldiers. Now, no jive lieutenant or corporal or sergeant is going to be hip enough research-wise, intelligence-wise. When I say intelligence, I don't mean here, I mean from the internal intelligence, to sew up heroin in dead American bodies, ship it all the way across the Pacific with all those other bodies, catch it when it gets to this end, open it up, take it out, and ship it to it. I wonder why, not just the press, why all of the patriotic people in this country didn't get outraged. We're not talking about once. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. That trial was darn near held in secret because nobody covered it. I think this trial is probably one of the most important trials that's ever been had, because we might be able, rumors all over the country that the CIA is involved in the heroin market in this country. Now, how can I be convinced that they're not, when hundreds of millions of dollars of heroin is shipped back in this country, sold up in the bodies of dead American soldiers?
Okay, let's go to another question. You're on Black Journal. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, please ask your question.
Mr. Gregory and also Mr. Anderson. I worked for the CIA for 8 years. And now I have a question, I suppose. Simply this, that do you really believe that they are totalitarian, as you say?
They, do you mean the CIA?
Right.
Well, I think if you would go back and look at some of the Senate hearings, the CIA, Mr. Colby, who's head of the CIA now, have admitted that the CIA was giving instructions to police departments in America. That's against the charter of the CIA. I mean, it's not what we believe, it's the evidence that's coming out. The CIA have admitted in testimony that they have, secretly recorded the conversations of presidents in this country. And so I think the evidence is there and speaks for itself.
Okay.
Well, the CIA has done a remarkable job at gathering intelligence. Now, that's what the CIA is supposed to do.
Domestic or international?
No, I'm talking about internationally. Our spy satellites and our listening devices are the best in the world. We've been able to listen to a Soviet pilot in the heartland of Russia asking for landing instructions from the tower beneath him. We've taken pictures from outer space that are catapulted out from space over the Pacific before they can splash into the water. They're snatched out of the air by Air Force planes, and photo analysts go over these things, and well, they can tell us where every missile in Russia is planted, where those that haven't yet been installed are being stored, where those that aren't yet stored are being manufactured. They can tell where every factory is, what it produces, how much it produces. They follow the car loadings. So their intelligence work is fantastic. But everyone, I think, is going to have to agree that the CIA has abused its power, that the CIA has meddled into the affairs of various nations. Now, I don't agree with Dick that they have meddled in the domestic affairs to the extent that Dick believes they have, unless he's got more information than I have, and that's possible.
Right, yeah.
But I don't have information that they have been meddling in the affairs of here in the United States to the extent that, that Dick believes, although there has been some meddling, and Dick is absolutely right. Any meddling at all is absolutely contrary to their charter.
Right.
Okay.
You know, briefly.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes, I would like to ask Dick Gregory or Jack Anderson, do they have any information about the CIA or Nixon trying to take over the country and place our subversives in jail? Louis Tegwin, in his book, The Glass House Tapes, alleges that this was supposed to happen in 1972.
No, I don't believe that. I just don't think that. I just am not the
I didn't
great
understand
believer
the question that well. What is it that
well,
he's asking?
he has heard about a plot by the CIA and Richard Nixon to take over the country. I don't think Richard Nixon has the political or the moral power to take over Whittier, California, let alone the country. And I don't think that this is anything for us to lose any sleep over. I think that Richard Nixon should be impeached. I think that impeachment would be a wholesome and a healthy thing to happen to this country. I think it would strengthen us abroad, and I think that it would make future presidents more accountable to the people. And I think that impeachment was put in the Constitution for that purpose, to make presidents accountable to the people, not just once every 4 years, but all the time. But I just don't believe that Richard Nixon is part of some plot to take over the country. I don't think that he could carry it out even if he were dreaming those kind of plots.
You have any thoughts?
I don't think he is. I wouldn't say that about the CIA or other government agencies. Quickly, I'd like to ask the question. There is beyond a shadow of a doubt what you said, that the CIA have found means of gathering intelligence on a worldwide level. They can take pictures of this and pictures of that. Now, is it facetious of me to ask a question that with all of these electronic devices that they can film and take pictures, that don't it seem like we would have used the CIA to go up to Alaska and see if we could find that plane that wrecked with Congressman Boggs on it? Because it's documented that they can find things. We got surveillance. We can pick up a needle under 10 feet of snow. Yet and still, nobody seems to know where that plane is. We say it have wrecked, and I think we should use this type of surveillance. Being that they have violated us and used these type of surveillance in America, I think they should use this surveillance and go up there and see if they can find that wreck. We know it have wrecked. We know we have the type of surveillance with the CIA that could find it.
I think the CIA has a capability of finding a wrecked plane. I agree, unless the plane went down in the ocean and is deep under the water.
Okay, let's take another call. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, please ask your question.
Well, I'd like to find out, is there any truth to the fact that some people have mentioned that there's a possibility that the former Attorney General John Mitchell attempted to stymie the investigation of the New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison's investigation of the John Kennedy assassination by offering him a federal judgeship? We don't know, but this question has come to mind, and there's a lot of people wondering, is this true?
All right, thank you.
I certainly have no information of that, and I would doubt it. I think that the Justice Department was not at all interested in going into Jim Garrison's charges, but I don't think that they ever tried to buy his silence by offering him a judgeship.
Okay. Hello?
Yes.
Yes, please ask
the
it.
subversive organization list is about to be revised, and I'm wondering whether Mr. Gregory or Mr. Anderson could speak to what sort of organizations they expect will replace the communist organizations that have been so long on that list.
Thank you. Do you understand the question? He said the subversive lists were about to be revised, and if you had any idea if there were any new organizations who might replace the communist party on that list, or I guess he means priority.
Well, these lists have been pretty much discredited, and the board, the Subversive Activities Control Board, has been disbanded. The lists become meaningless once. It seems to me, if I were a subversive, or Dick, if you were a subversive, and we belonged to some organization that got on the list, we'd get out of that organization and probably would join the Republican Party or something like that. So these lists are silly.
I think anybody in this country that's subversive, if they're hip, they know with the electronic surveillance we have in this country today, it is totally impossible for you to belong to any subversive group and you're not being recorded and they don't know about it. So with or without a list, you know.
If I may, we have another call. I'd just like to read a couple paragraphs from one of Jack Anderson's columns, I believe, on espionage equipment. American intelligence agencies are perfecting bizarre surveillance devices which make James Bond's gadgets look Victorian. Some of the equipment is already in use by government agencies engaged in snooping. The devices depend on lasers, infrared rays, and microwaves to eavesdrop, pierce the darkness, and peep through keyholes. The ancient art of training pigeons, for example, has been combined with modern laser techniques. Keen-eyed pigeons have been trained to fly wherever they see a split-second flash of red made by a laser beam. The beam may be subliminally flashed on the windowsill, say, of a foreign embassy or military conference room. A pigeon, with an adhesive-encased bug stuck to his chest, flies to the sill. He is trained to snatch off the adhesive-coated microphone transmitter, which then drops to the sill. The bug records all conversations in the room. When the intelligence agency wants to retrieve the bug, it flashes another laser beam. The pigeon flies to the sill, presses his body to the adhesive packet, and flies home. Now, I think, Dick, with what you've just said, that anybody involved in anything subversive has to be aware that with equipment at that modern and sophisticated, they must be under surveillance.
Well, this sounds wild and fantastic. It sounds unbelievable, but it's true. That came right from people who were engaged in it. One of the finest investigative reporters in this country, Les Whitten, who works with me, dug that out, and it's an absolute true story.
Yeah,
what's more, with laser beams, they can record now. They can actually record conversation in a room by measuring the rattles in the window panes caused by voice vibration.
We have a very interesting question next, and if either of you could give me a succinct answer. Now, we have celebrated the agencies on their technological superb performance and capability. Why can't they find Patricia Hearst?
Well, again, I'm not too sure that they can't find her.
Oh, I see.
There may be a question of of personal safety involved.
I understand. Okay.
But I have a reason to believe that the FBI knows a great deal more about that organization and about the whereabouts of it than what they're saying. All you have to do is look at some of the other kidnappings lately and see how quick the FBI has been to move in once the victim is freed.
Right. Like Reg Murphy in Atlanta.
Once the victim was freed, it took them only, a few hours.
Right. Okay.
No, you said that.
Excuse me one second. I'm sorry. Yes, you're on Black Journal.
Yes, I'd just like to comment that it seems very sad that the United States seems to be absolving itself by directing its positive energy at this point towards impeachment and such, rather than demanding that civil liberties be enforced.
Did you have a question? Okay, just a moment. She didn't have, but here's someone who does. Hello?
Yes, I would like to know, what does the CIA have to do with the downfall of the Marxist government in Chile?
Thank you. The question was, what does the CIA have to do with the downfall of the Marxist government in Chile? Anybody?
Well, we know, and I exposed in the column, that the CIA had been involved with ITT in trying to keep Allende from coming to power. Now, since we know from ITT's own documents that occurred, there's good reason to be suspicious that after he got into power, that the CIA might have been involved in his downfall. But in all honesty, I have been unable to confirm that. We do know that the Army got its weapons from the United States, but there is no evidence that I've been able to get that either the Army or the CIA knew in advance that the Chilean Army intended to overthrow Allende.
Dick, you have any?
No,
comments on
I
it?
would be. I'm the same way. I would be very suspect. The fact that, you know, we can look at the past track record. Look what happened with the Bay of Pigs, the direct involvement there, and so I would be tremendously, you know, suspect that there was some involvement there.
Okay. Yes, please ask your question.
Yeah, I don't have a question. Mine is more or less a statement. I would like to agree with Dick Gregory, getting back to the takeover of the country by the president and his cabinet, his subordinate. I agree with Dick Gregory wholeheartedly, and I want to thank Jack Anderson and people like him on the Washington Post who caught this thing in time and nipped it in the bud, because I do believe there was about to be a takeover.
Thank you.
Let me clear up one thing. I didn't say I believe Nixon was a part of it. I don't, to this day, believe Nixon was part of it. I think if there would have been a takeover, they would have killed him just as quick as they killed anybody else on that list.
Okay. All right, one moment, please. Yes, please ask your question.
Yes, I'd like to know if either of tonight's guests have any information regarding support by black American groups of African liberation movements, either in the Portuguese colonies or in southern Africa, and if this is an issue of concern to American intelligence agencies.
Thank you. The question was, if did anyone have any information on black organization support of African Liberation Army? I'm sure he's talking about warfare in the African continent, and was the latter part, was it an intelligence consideration?
In South Africa and Rhodesia, places
Guinea-Bissau.
like that. I don't know of any direct connections. But I have had access to some intelligence reports, secret intelligence reports, which show that there is a loose alliance between the various revolutionary movements. In other words, they're in touch with one another. They exchange tactics, they exchange information, they even exchange weapons. There have been sales of weapons between these different revolutionary groups. And I think it's possible, then, that some of the more revolutionary groups in the United States could be associated.
Well, let me say this again. If they are associated, then the answer to your question, they know about it.
Who is they?
The surveillance he was talking about. Yeah, I would imagine the internal security and the external security would have it all documented. Yeah.
Dick, let me ask you a question as a black man who I would say mildly has a lot of sensitivity toward the intelligence community as concerning black America. Do you find that there's almost a paranoia, just an out-and-out fear on the part of many blacks because of either what they believe is surveillance or what they know is surveillance?
Well, you see, I can't answer that for nobody other than myself. I know the Black Panthers called me and told me that they was glad I was staying home because they had got a threat that I was going to be killed if I came into Newark. And I said, well, I'm not staying home. I'm on my way there. He said, well, haven't you been told about it? I said, who told me? He said, we gave it to the FBI like 3 weeks ago, right? Now, the fact that my phone is tapped after I hung up, now the Chicago FBI calls me and tells me, this is real. I had a guy came to me, just like you get people come to you and give you real stuff. He says, I was in a plot on an attempt on your life. And like, I love you. I sent 5 letters, one to Bob Johnson at Jet Magazine, one to Chicago Police Department, one to Chicago FBI, one to J. Edgar Hoover, and one to the Justice Department. Bob Johnson was the only person that got in touch with me. Now, you can say maybe those other letters didn't get there, but Bob Johnson was the only person that gotten in touch with me. And so I would say, you know, it's to me, it's real. I'm not talking about a paranoia because I don't care about dying. If my living mean I have to quit doing what I'm doing, I would help them pull the trigger. So it's not a paranoia with me. You know, I see things out here. I question how can the fella that sent you the tape that was going to take the plane and fly it into the White House had been arrested twice before within the last 9 months, knowing he was talking about killing the president. How can he be on the street? Now, when this happened, I have to be suspect.
If he were black, he wouldn't be on the street.
That's right. Unless he was out there for a reason. You know.
All right, next. Hello?
Yeah.
Yes, please ask your question.
Yeah, I'd like to know if Jack Anderson believes that the Jackson Street killing should be reopened.
Thank you. You familiar with the Jackson Street?
Absolutely. We've just had an example here of the Kent State killings being opened
after 4 years,
after a long delay, and justice about to be done. Justice should be done in all these places. Absolutely essential that justice be done.
Okay, Dick, I was sort of alluding to, and I'm sure you can only answer for Dick Gregory. Mr. Anderson, either of you, if you would want to answer. But I think that just about everybody in the black community thinks their phone is tapped. Now, I don't know if the FBI and the CIA, if they are tapping phones, can tap everybody's phone. But you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just a widespread fear. I think to some extent, perhaps we as black people are becoming immobilized in some instances. Everybody's not brave as Dick Gregory.
Right. Well, I think if the phone companies would admit to us that something in the last 5 years have happened with their equipment, but all at once you pick up the phone and you call people and you hear funny things on the line, and you don't have no money, man, to call somebody in to see if it's a bug, to sweep the house and see if it's a bug. You hear funny things on the line, right? You hear guys like, I make a phone call and it goes through and I hear somebody mention my name. Well, Dick Gregory just got in town, right? Well, you know, anybody whose phone is bugged, I mean, if it acts unnormal, you would have to assume with all of the columns. Now, one, black folks read your column. It'd be very interesting to find out what percentage of black folks read your column. Now, we don't have the money and the mechanism to go hire lawyers to get taps off our phone, but when we read that column about all this slick surveillance and all the research we have and all of this, and then I start hearing funny things happening on my phone, it's only normal that I can think that. Let me give you an example of what I did. I called a friend of mine in Chicago and said in 15 minutes the stuff is here. And we're going to pick it up in 63rd and Cottage Grove. That is like Africa, 63rd and Cottage Grove, right? I put my wife in the car. We drove to 63rd and Cottage Grove, and it looked like it was an all-white colony. White cats pulling up, getting out of cars. Now, I know my phone is tapped when you can do things like this. And so I would say in many instances, it is very real.
We're short on time, and I would like to get a very short comment from the both of you. Mr. Anderson, succinctly as you can, what direction do you see the personal liberties of Americans going in? Do you see us going toward a fascist state? Do you see us coming back from what was almost a fascist state?
I think that the American people have been jolted by one news shock after another. These Watergate scandals, I think, have had a deep effect upon the American people. I think they're almost temporarily paralyzed. But after they get over the numbness, after they get over the shock, I think they're not going to tolerate this sort of thing in the future, and I'm optimistic.
I hate to interrupt, Dick, I'd like to get you, but we are out of time. I'd like to thank both of you for a most interesting discussion, and come back to Black Journal very soon.
Pleasure.
And thank you again.
Thank you.
From Washington, D.C., Black Journal has presented We the Enemy, with guests Jack Anderson, syndicated columnist, and Dick Gregory, political satirist. Our host and moderator has been Tony Brown.